Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So we should be broadcasting now.
All right. Hello, I'm Linda Heisman-Powell, and I serve as the chair of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being held remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. We know that Jacqueline Lightcap is absent. Allison Bell. Pamela Harrison.
Yeah, I think actually I just forgot. I got a message from Allison Bell before we started. She was not able to join us today either.
Okay. Pamela Harrison.
Is it Kelly Harrison?
I think it probably should be. Can you fix that, David?
I
Yeah,
am Kelly Harrison and I'm here.
All right.
that's
Hi,
my
Kelly.
mistake.
Hi.
Emily Kessler.
I am here.
Pamela Neidert.
Here.
Christy Steele.
Here.
Stephanie Wiley.
I'm here, and it's Willie.
Willie. Okay. And do you go by Stephanie or Nikki?
I go by Nikki.
Okay. And Mike Williams.
Here.
And Alice Jean.
Here.
I note that the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On August 30th, 2023, we sent notice of the meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did check it before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if someone beeps over, I will let you know.
All right, thank you. Well, the meeting is now called to order and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda. And the first item of the agenda is approval of our current agenda. Does anyone have any additions to the agenda or discussion, or do I entertain a motion to approve the agenda?
Emily Kessler moves to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Emily. Do I have a second?
A second.
Second that.
All in favor? Yeah.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Any opposition? No, motion carries. Now I would like those of you to review the minutes from our previous meeting and let us know if there's any additions, corrections. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Emily Kessler makes a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Emily. I need a second.
I second.
All in favor? Thumbs up, aye, yes.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, motion carries. The next item on our agenda is David will give the executive director's report.
And Linda, I just wanted to check, there was an item as far as introduction of new advisory committee members.
Sorry, I forgot, skipped ahead. I got really excited. So I would like to welcome the new advisory committee members, and really what I want to do, and actually I talked to David about this, is just, just go around and let everybody know who we are. So everybody feels welcome. So I'm Linda Heitzman Powell. I think almost everybody here knows me. I have been around for since the cows came home, basically in Kansas behavior analysis circles and advocacy and service in the state of Kansas and testimony, et cetera. I've was on the committee before as a committee member, and when a spot opened up on the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board for a licensed psychologist, I applied for that position and was appointed by the governor. And so in that position, I was also now able to, thank you, Christy, fill the role of the chair of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee. So that's kind of who I am. I'll kick it around in a round robin format. So from there, David, I'm going to kick it to you and let you kick it to somebody after you so you can let everybody know who you are.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So I am David Fye. I'm the executive director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. And we are a composite agency. And so we oversee 7 different professions that all have a mental health or substance use addiction connection. And I have been in my position now almost about 3 years. And on behalf of the agency, one of the things that I do is help facilitate the advisory committee. And these advisory committees, you'll hear a little bit more about during the training, but they're really important. And I really want to say thank you to all of you for volunteering your time and dealing with some of the topics that the board has asked the advisory committee to consider, and then talking about other topics that can be forwarded up to the board for any recommended changes. And so thank you again. I've met a few of you over email, but it's nice to be able to put a face with a name. And if I can be helpful to you in any way to help you get connected in your role as an advisory committee member, feel free to let me know. And another person who is a great resource for you as well is Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to her, and then she can introduce herself to you as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Allen. I'm the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager, and I have been with the board since 1999. And it's nice to meet you all, and I'm here if you have any questions or need any information.
And now, Leslie, you have to defer it to someone in particular.
Yeah, Leslie, you have to kick it.
Okay, I'm going to say Emily Kessler because she's next to me.
That works. Hi, I'm Emily Kessler. I come from the educational side. I was a special education by trade and became a BCBA a little bit later in my career. I currently work for a federal grant. We contract with the Kansas Department of Education, and schools apply to work with us to help them set up supports in an MTSS framework. I, in particular, am the behavior and social emotional trainer for that team. And this is my 3rd year on the advisory board.
And who are you going to?
I forgot. I'm sorry. How about Mike? Because he's right next to me.
Fair enough. Mike Williams, been a behavior analyst since 2016. Currently, I'm the executive director of Optimal Outcomes. We provide behavior and analytic services throughout the Kansas City area on both sides of the state line. And do that and have 3 kids that keep me super, super busy. So that's my little snapshot. And I'm going to go to Pam Neidert.
Well, thank you for having me, and good job pronouncing my last name. That's pretty impressive. Everybody said it correctly. I'm Pam Neidert. I am a faculty member in the Applied Behavioral Science Department at the University of Kansas. I've been on the faculty since 2008. I also direct the Edna Hill Child Development Center there on campus, and am the undergraduate studies director for the department. And this is my first meeting, so thank you very much for having me.
And now, Pam, you have to turn it over to someone else as well.
Oh, that's right, the popcorn. How about Kelly Harrison?
Hello. I am very similar to Pam actually at the moment. So I am also a faculty member in the Applied Behavioral Science Department at KU. I have been faculty at KU since 2019, and I am actually transitioning out of that role currently and into a new role with a company called Kansas Behavior Support, whose mission is sort of to get services out to more of the rural areas of Kansas. So I'm really excited for that new role and to learn more about telehealth and some of the barriers that come along with living in rural areas and seeking services. And I'm really excited to get to serve on this committee as well. And let's see, I will throw it to Nikki.
Hello, I am Nikki Willie. I've been a BCABA since 2021. I am the Assistant Clinical Director here at New Hope Therapy Services in Wichita. As you can probably tell, I am originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and my family is currently stationed here in Wichita. And this is my first meeting.
Now, Nikki, it's your turn to turn it over to someone.
Let me shoot it over to Christy Steele.
I feel like I'm in grade school again, waiting for my turn. Who's going to pick me? I'm Christy Steele. I'm a BCBA in Lawrence, Kansas. I've been in the field since 2008. And I did graduate school at University of Houston Clear Lake with Dorothy Lerman, and I'm out here in Lawrence because my partner is getting her PhD at KU, hopefully finishing soon. And I have my own private practice in Lawrence, specializing in intensive caregiver training. And I am going to remember to pop, and I will do pop Alice.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Alice John, and I graduated from ABS department from KU, and so happy to see some familiar faces. And I'm currently a faculty member here at KU Medical Center, and I primarily I have a little bit of clinical practice, but I primarily do research and some teaching as well. And this is my third year serving on this committee. Yes, I think I'm the last one, so we can, Linda, back to you.
Thank you, Alice. So thanks for that. One of the things that I've found working on this committee is that we're all pretty invested, right, in the behavior analytic community within which we find ourselves here in Kansas. And so I think we have a really good group of people to help provide guidance to the larger behavioral sciences regulatory board, specifically around issues that are related to behavior analysis and how we provide that service here in the state of Kansas. So welcome. I'm excited you're here. So now, David, I'll kick it over to you for your executive director's report.
Thank you, Linda. So at each of the full board meetings as executive director, I provide a report to the board in terms of different BSRB operations, any kind of legislative updates, any kind of announcements or meetings of note. And then at the advisory committees that meet on the off months in between board meetings, I sort of do a similar report, but one of the information and items that I give to you is items that have happened at the last board meeting. So I'll just give a quick report in terms of some of the operations that are taking place here, and then letting some of the new members know some of the topics that have framed our discussion and kind of how we got to where we are today. So in terms of some of the operations, I'll go over this a little bit more during the training, but the BSRB is in a time of change right now. We had a bill that was originally brought forward to the legislature by the board last year or earlier this spring that had a number of changes to different license types and had some changes to flexibility of licensure in terms of helping people maintain their license, helping people come back to the professions a little easier, updating and modernizing some of the requirements for licensure, shortening some of the timeframes for reciprocity, things like that. That bill that passed was Senate Bill 131. And the final bill that passed was actually three different bills combined into one, but 95% of the bill was BSRB items. And so there's some information on our website, and actually we had sent a message out to all licensees a little bit before the beginning of July, just kind of about some of those new license types that were being rolled out and some of the other items that were going to be rolled out. And then on our website, we posted another announcement about August 14th or August 15th with the other items that we were able to move forward at that time. One of the items was we were able to lower some of the temporary license fees for some of the professions. And then for the other new license types that were from that bill, we needed to set a certain amount for the fees and regulations. So there was a temporary regulation that was put into place. We are following that up with the permanent regulation, and that should be coming up sometime here shortly. The board will need to vote on that at the board's meeting on October 23rd, 2023. And so those items are coming up, but that bill, Senate Bill 131, it added some new responsibilities for the agency. And with those new responsibilities, we asked the legislature for authority to hire 2 new licensing specialist positions, and we were granted that authority. That has increased our budget, so we are spending more money for those positions, but I think they'll be very helpful in making sure that we can do a lot of those new responsibilities and meet some of the new timeframes. And so as of July 1st, that's when we obtained the authority for those new positions. And so we put out advertisements, interviewed people for that, both outside the agency and then also internal hires. And we did receive a number of applications, and very happy to announce we were able to have 2 existing employees want to challenge themselves and take on more responsibilities. So we were able to hire 2 members of our current staff to become licensing specialists, but that created some other vacancies for positions. And so we had to advertise those positions. And so as of about 3 weeks ago, we are now fully staffed. And so really excited about that. Still, there's a lot of moving pieces. We're getting people into the right positions, figuratively and also literally. We're getting new technology for some of those employees. We also lack some physical space to do things the way we've traditionally done things with office space. And so we currently have 2 staff members set up in the boardroom and some partial positions. We're in the process of converting an existing office to a shared office by 2 employees. And so we actually have some facility staff here today. So if you hear some noises in the background, that's them connecting more things. And so we are literally under construction and plugging people into new roles. But I think in a few months, we'll have everything in place. And I think it'll be really productive, making sure we're doing things in a timely manner. And so really excited about that. In terms of some other operating updates, there's a number of different yearly responsibilities. We submitted our annual budget in September. Aside from the new staff members, there's really not going to be a lot of new expenses for us. So we're going to stick to the amounts that we were approved by the legislature last year for this current fiscal year, and then also next year. That's what we submitted for our budget request. And then the governor will be making recommendations on our budget as of January. And so that will come out at the beginning of the year, and then the legislature will make further changes over the course of the year. So in terms of some other items, I did want to reference some topics from the previous board meeting. The board met on Monday, September 11th, and welcomed a new board member. Jill Flessing is the new board member for addiction counseling, and she is taking the position currently or previously held by Deb Stidham. So there is one more member of the board. There will probably not be any more changes on the board until next July or so. Additionally, at the board meeting, the board talked about a number of topics of interest. One of those is that there was a recent federal legislation that dealt with the Service Members Civil Relief Act and portability of professional licenses for service members and their spouses. That federal law is something that we're working through, and a number of other states are working through as well. But as we are working through it with legal counsel, we think it will allow certain military members an alternate pathway to practice in Kansas. So it will still be able to apply for traditional licensure, but under that, there may be some military members that would be able to practice under a form of recognition if they had a license with a similar scope of practice in another jurisdiction. And like I said, we're still working through the logistics on how that would work. As a public protection agency, we have a license verification portal. And so part of the reason we have that is making sure the public has notice about who's providing services in Kansas. And if individuals are providing services under a recognition model, we need to make sure that we are able to inform the public of who's practicing and what authority they have to practice. And so there's also questions about, if these individuals do something that would mean a complaint is filed against them, what jurisdiction do we have over them in terms of the ability to issue a summary proceeding order or a fine or a penalty against them because we don't have authority over them as a licensee. And so some of those things were not specifically spelled out in the bill itself at the federal level. So we're working on that, but we hope to have something on the website here pretty shortly. Additionally, the board is working on drafting language for regulations on an expedited license application process. Right now, there was some language that was put into the bill that passed that said the board would come up with a process, but there's really not a similar model that I have found in other states. So we're kind of developing this from scratch with the board. But the last board meeting, we talked about a general framework for this, and the board was receptive to that. So at the October 23rd meeting, the board will be reviewing a little bit more language on that topic. And if we're able to kind of finalize that regulation language, then that could be something that we move forward and try to have put in regulation later on this fall or sometime early next year. Additionally, there are some other states that have something called an impaired provider program. And some states use this program as sort of a remedy for disciplinary purposes. So if you have a complaint against a practitioner, but you find that there's a co-occurring issue with substance use or mental health impairment, you can have an agreement worked out with a different group to assist with tracking or monitoring or having some other resources available to assist with that process. And so the board is interested in seeing what types of services are available here in Kansas. And so we're going to be looking at a request for proposal or RFP. And so we'll be looking at putting something out either later this fall or early next year. And then I mentioned the board's offsite planning meeting. The board seeks to have a meeting once a year where everybody comes in person. They usually try to hold that at different locations around the state. In the past, I think it has been perhaps in Junction City. Last year it was in Kansas City. This year it'll be in Wichita, and that will be on Monday, October 23rd. It'll be an all-day meeting. It is open to the public. There's information on the BSRB website about the location, but that will be at the Seasons venue at Watson Park in Wichita, and that'll be from about 9 a.m. until about 4 p.m. And like I mentioned, it is off-site, but it is open to the public. So any members from the public are welcome to attend and sit in on any portion of that meeting. Two other items of note that I wanted to reference for you before I conclude my report. So part of what Leslie Allen, the assistant director, and I do in our roles is try to provide outreach and let individuals from different groups know about the work of the board and the activities. As you're aware, in terms of the mental health field, there's a lot of connected groups. And we're really trying to be proactive and let individuals know about some of these recent changes in law, also some of the upcoming changes in regulation the board is pursuing. So next week, we will be hosting 2 informational forums. On Tuesday, October 17th, we will have an informational forum that is specifically directed towards educators, individuals that are from colleges or universities or other programs that have degrees for individuals that we license. And as part of that educator forum, it is my understanding that many years ago, the BSRB had hosted a forum for educators. And so we are trying to have a version of that, but we have not had one in many years. And so we are trying to rebuild our list of contacts from schools as well as part of that process. So we don't intend this to be a one-time only forum. We are hopeful to go ahead and provide updates to people at this meeting next week on Tuesday from 1 to 2 over Zoom. And then we hope to have another similar meeting sometime next year. And any people that we did not, were not able to connect with this time, we'll try to reach out to more next time and continue to rebuild that list of contacts. And then on Wednesday of next week, on Wednesday, October 18th, There is a similar forum. This will be an informational forum, mostly the same information, but it'll be directed towards employers. So different groups that employ a lot of the individuals that are licensed by the BSRB. And so we're hoping to kind of connect with both groups next week and then provide information to them on the different changes and then answer any questions and then maybe collect a little bit of feedback that we can share with the board at the board's offsite training planning meeting on the 23rd. So to my knowledge, the BSRB has never had a meeting quite like the one next Wednesday for employers, but I think that's a group of individuals we want to connect with, and we want to make sure that we're in good communication with them and hear some of their thoughts as well. And so we're trying to take a more of a proactive approach and kind of think outside the box on some of these things. So wanted to share that with you as well. But at that point, I'll go ahead and end my report and answer any questions you may have.
Does anybody have any questions for David and his report on the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board's meetings and activities? Nope. Thank you, David, for providing that update. The next item on our agenda are some of the updates from the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, or ASPPB. They held their annual meeting from September 27th to October 1st in Cleveland, Ohio. And so there were I'm appointed to the board because I'm a licensed psychologist. And our other licensed psychologist went as well, along with David. So Richard Nobles went with us. And so the three of us were represented in Cleveland. We represented Kansas. Probably much better through David and Richard's work than mine. I was a new member, so believe it or not, I spent most of the meeting keeping my mouth shut. I know most of you won't believe that about me, but it's true. And so, David, do you want to give a brief report, and then I'll talk a little bit about my impressions?
Sure,
Or-
I could do that. Either way is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so so this is as a composite agency, and we do have several different professions, but some of the professions have unique connections. For example, social work by and large is licensed in a somewhat similar way in most states. And the profession of psychology at the PhD level, there's a general consistent framework for licensure. There's some discussion about certain states requiring APA accreditation, whereas others allow for educational equivalency. But then when you start to venture a little further into other mental health professions, there is a lack of uniformity between states. For example, in the area of psychology, we are one of about 17 states that licenses master's level psychology. The majority of states don't license master's level psychologists. And for some of the states that don't, there is strong opposition to that topic. And then for the field of behavior analysis, there are some states that do not license separately behavior analysts. And so there's movement in different ways in different states, but we thought it'd be helpful to kind of talk about some of the topics that were talked about at that annual conference. Some of the items that we observed during the conference, there was a mock disciplinary hearing that they provided to us, which was interesting. This was an example where you had an individual who had received a complaint, and the board, that fictional board, had moved forward and essentially found that the person had violated their rules of unprofessional conduct. And then that person requested a hearing. And so this was an opportunity for the board to basically lay out its case and the person to respond to that. But then there were individuals playing the mock attorneys. There was a mock facilitator of the hearing, and it was really interesting. And then there were 3 actual attorneys for different boards that discussed how things would have worked a little bit differently in their jurisdiction. And then there was sort of a big roundtable discussion with other attendees about how does their state handle disciplinary proceedings, and how do they handle the violations and disciplinary remedies. And I thought that was really interesting. One of the things that we've talked about here for the behavior analyst profession in Kansas is that when the profession was added to the statutes were worded differently than some of the other professions. So one of the items that was included in the bill that just passed, Senate Bill 131, it included some disciplinary remedies to make this profession a little bit more similar to the other professions. For example, the previous language said that if you are a behavior analyst and you commit an infraction against the unprofessional conduct regulations, the remedies the board has available is to suspend your license or revoke your license. But if you had a minor violation, the board was put in a position to say, okay, we either suspend your license for something like a minor CE violation, or we do nothing. And neither one of those seems the most fair. So the language that was added to the bill provided more similar ability to provide disciplinary remedies, such as a fine or public censure or other conditions on a license. And some of the states that were part of that mock disciplinary proceeding talked about they tried to use grids for different violations, and they try to make that public so individuals know, well, if I have this type of violation, I'm likely to get this, even though there could be extenuating circumstances or exacerbating circumstances, mitigating based on other factors involved, but it could provide some more transparency. However, I think putting that together is very difficult, and you're going to have some situations where individuals violate multiple regulations, and there would be a consideration of, do you stack all those remedies on top of each other for something that may be somewhat of a minor violation, even though it does violate several regulations. So, but it makes you think. It makes you kind of look at what we have here in Kansas and say, do we need to modify these further? And then there was also some conversation about just looking at equivalencies in general and trying to see, how can we balance helping more people become licensed professionals with also the role of the licensing board or regulatory board, in that we want to make sure that we're licensing people quickly and consistently. And the more flexibility you add to the licensure process, the more time will be added to helping people get through that process. And so there's efficiency, and then there's flexibility, and those don't always run one-to-one. And so in talking about the master's level and educational equivalencies in general, there were some topics that came up as part of that process. Right now, for the psychology profession, the language in the regulation says you either came from an APA accredited school or you meet the alternate requirements in the regulations, but a lot of that is based on having certain classes and coursework. And the APA is switching to a model now of not coursework, but more of competencies. And the question is, well, how do you measure competencies, and how does the regulatory board measure competencies, especially when we're trying to be efficient and move quickly through this process? So lots of things to think about, and good information. And we had a number of good conversations at the conference. And so with that, for the sake of time especially, I'll go ahead and defer it back to Linda, and she can share some other thoughts that she had on some of those conferences.
So the first thing is that when I was listening to all these other states, and I said this at the psychology subcommittee meeting the other night, is how proactive Kansas is on our licensing board in trying to anticipate upcoming changes or future changes, and trying to be proactive about that instead of reactive. And so I think you guys should all feel thankful that you're in a state that takes these issues seriously and is looking out for your best interests as well as the best interest of the consumers out in the field, right? So I'm proud to be a member of this board. The reason I'm on this psych board is because, or on the BSRB board in general, is because I'm a licensed psychologist as well as a board certified behavior analyst. But most of you know that I'm more comfortable in the behavior analytic world than I am the psych world. So when we went to go to this conference, I was 100% expecting, licensed psychologists coming from the traditional psychological background, right? And lo and behold, might have been a small number, but there was at least 4 or 5 behavior analysts there that were representing their state psych boards, right? Their licensing boards. So that was really exciting to me. So my takeaway is we're kind of like Pinky in the Brain, right? Keep calm and take over the world. So, we're out there. As a matter of fact, in Arizona, Brian Davey was the rep that came from Arizona. right now in the state of Arizona, their behavior analyst licensees outnumber their psychologists. Isn't that crazy? So they're working to do a separate type of board for their behavior analysts in the state of Arizona. So, you know, we've always said we're small, but we're mighty. Well, now we're starting to not be so small, right? And while my hope is, even though David did his best to try to get us a seat on the board, on the behavioral sciences regulatory board, it was stricken from that legislation. Our goal is to continue to advocate for that. And even though, you know, David tried really hard to get that done, it didn't happen, but that doesn't mean we give up, and that we continue to try to advocate for a position for us on the board, right? As we start to grow our discipline in the state of Kansas. So I think that's something we should always keep in the forefront of our minds as we're, you know, working on this. Change sometimes is slower than we want it to be, but as long as you don't give up, right? It's not so much what you know, it's who you know, and it's also perseverance, right? So we will just continue to persevere on that. So that was my takeaway, is that state licensing boards are embracing behavior analysts, and we are coming into our own. And so you guys are all part of a good group. That's my takeaway, David. So anybody have any questions or comments? Anybody want to say how excited they were that Arizona, their behavior analysts outnumber their psychologists?
I'm very excited to hear that. But also just really, I agree with what you said, Linda, in terms of, you know, it's great that we are able to be, you know, you are able to be in there to represent not only psychology, but also behavior analysts. And also, you know, the BSRB, David, have been very supportive in terms of trying to push for really adding a person who is from behavior analytic field to be there solely for that purpose. So I guess I'm just thinking, like, there's probably a long way to go, but I feel like we're on the right track.
Yeah. Thank you. And the one other thing I do want to say about APBA, or that not APBA, ASPPB, is that mock hearing that David was talking about. I never thought that I would ever use the information that I saw. But part of my job is being on the behavior analyst, the behavioral sciences regulatory board, is also being involved in looking at, you know, license disputes and that sort of thing. So it really was an eye-opener at the conference. I'm thankful that I was able to attend and get that kind of experience, because as much as I don't like to think about it, something may come up. And David, here's a question for you. So if there's a licensed behavior analyst that gets reported to the board, do they go to the big board or do they come to us?
So if we receive a complaint against the behavior analyst, as long as we have jurisdiction, then that would be investigated, and then that would come before the complaint review committee for the board.
Okay.
And so if it's a licensing matter, it would come before the full board under a CAPA proceeding. And then if they appeal that decision, it would go before a hearing panel. But if it's a disciplinary matter, it would go before the complaint review committee for the board.
Okay, so and then here's another question, right? Because I'm new in this role as well. So if we did get a complaint about a behavior analyst to the larger board, can we ask somebody from this committee to sit on the review as a licensed behavior analyst?
If it was a disciplinary matter?
Yeah.
You or there's a public member of the board who serves on this advisory committee as well. She's not here today, but Jackie Lightcap. But
Okay.
the members of the CRC are 5 board members. And those are defined as a licensed psychologist, a social worker, at least one public member, and then the other two spots are one of the other professions that's
Uh-huh.
the board, and then another public member or another one of the professions, as long as there's not more than one person for a profession. So
Okay, so for us on this committee, except for me, because I'm on the larger committee, the likelihood that they're going to be called to serve on some kind of panel for something like that is relatively low.
right,
Okay,
the hearing panels are just the board members.
okay. All right, so you guys are off the hook. I'll take one for you.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. You're welcome. All right, so if nobody has any other questions about the conference that we all went to in the wonderful, beautiful Cleveland, Ohio, where we all got to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, then I will turn it back over to David for training, right? Because as new members, you all are responsible for understanding your roles and responsibilities on this advisory committee.
Yes, well, thank you, Linda. And I do have a large PowerPoint presentation. It does take about an hour. So if you have questions as we're going through things, just go ahead and write those down, and we can either talk about them at the end of the presentations today, or we can talk about them next meeting, or if you want to send me a follow-up email, I'm happy to kind of clarify anything we talked about. But before I jump into the training, I do want to compliment and thank Linda again. The board of the BSRB is kind of a unique board in certain ways. There are certain boards that meet every other month or even quarterly for some of the other state agencies, and board members are asked to attend those meetings and do a little bit of research on the side. But our board is really an active board, and the board meets frequently. Not only are you a member of the board, you're also a chair of one of these advisory committees. You're asked to serve on hearing panels. Certain members serve on the complaint review committee. Sometimes there's subcommittees. It's really active. And I understand as professionals, all of your time is very, very important. I fully value that. And so I just want you to know how fortunate you all are to have a representative in Linda, because attending these national meetings is really helpful. And in my role, I try to attend them and bring back information to the board, and hope to be in my position for many, many years. So I'm trying to build my institutional knowledge. But I think it's really important too that we have board members that go out and attend these meetings too, talk to people from different states, bring back ideas. And then that way we can really drive things forward and continue to modernize things and make things better. And so, yeah, I definitely want to thank Linda for volunteering your time, and appreciated our conversations then, and look forward to continuing to attend more of those types of events in the future. So, and now you are welcome. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And this PowerPoint presentation, I want you all to know it is too large for you to probably receive over email, but it is posted on the BSRB website. If you go, there's a different link for each of the advisory committees, and then there's a different note for each one of the meetings. And so there's materials for each one under that. So if you ever want to look back at any of these slides, that's where this is posted. And so we'll go ahead and start the training. So first, to kind of frame the discussion, the BSRB, the mission of the agency in accordance with the intent of the Kansas legislature is to protect and serve consumers of services offered by BSRB licensees through the issuance of licenses, resolution of complaints, and the creation of appropriate regulations accomplished through efficiency, fairness, and respect to all those involved. Some of the history of the agency. It was formed in 1980 when the Kansas legislature created the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. And they did that by taking the existing board of psychological examiners and the social work examiners board, put them both together, and then over the years, more have been added. For example, these were the professions that have been added in the years that have followed. Professional counselors, master's level psychologists, marriage and family therapists, addiction counselors, and of course, behavior analysts. Rather than have a separate board for psychologists, social workers, each of the professions, et cetera, there is one board. And so we have one board. It's composed of professional members and public members. And so when I refer to us as a composite board, that's what I'm talking about, the combination of individuals from lots of different professions. Some of the benefits of having a composite board is that as a model, we are able to save a significant amount of operational expenses by sharing resources and utilizing licensing and investigative staff for similar subject areas. One way to help understand the BSRB compared to an association is that a regulatory board exists to protect consumers. We are created by the legislature and we are governed by statute, whereas an association exists in some ways to enhance the profession and is also created in large part by members of that profession in most cases. In terms of the agency itself, we currently have 12 staff members, including myself, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager, Leslie Allen, who you met earlier. We also have a licensing specialist, 2 investigators, and then clerical employees that assist our staff. We are an fee-funded agency, and what that means is that we do not receive any money directly from the state to do operations. But by statute, we contribute 10% of all of the revenue we receive, up to $100,000 back to the state of Kansas to help fund state operations. Our revenue is primarily from license fees. Our budget is a little over $1.1 million on a year-to-year basis. And as a small agency, we have a significant amount of contractual services in our budget, primarily because of the agreements we have with the agency that hosts our licensing database, legal services, et cetera. All board members are appointed by the governor, and they serve 1 4-year term, and they may be reappointed for a second term, allowing service on the board for a maximum of 8 consecutive years. The board is composed of the following positions, and these are specifically identified in the statute for the agency. There are 2 psychologists, 2 social workers, 1 marriage and family therapist, 1 professional counselor, 1 addiction counselor, 1 master's level psychologist, and 4 public members. There are 2 basic functions of the BSRB, licensing and also investigation of complaints or discipline. Every full board meeting, I provide a report to the board that shows the number of active permanent licenses that we oversee. Currently, there's about 15,155, and those are in the 7 professions we've talked about so far. In that document that I give to the board, there is a breakdown by level of license as well. And so you can see the current numbers of the different levels of license. For your profession, there are almost 400 LBAs. There's 396 currently, and then there's 19 assistant behavior analysts. So a little over 400 for your profession. In fiscal year 2023, the BSRB issued 1,586 permanent licenses across all professions, 433 temporary licenses, and 66 out-of-state temporary permits. Of the 1,586 permanent licenses, these are new licenses that were issued by the board, 1,124 were by initial licensure, and then 462 were through reciprocity, where someone is licensed in another state or jurisdiction and they come to Kansas wanting to practice here. Last fiscal year in 2023, the BSRB processed 5,789 license renewals. And as part of the license renewal process, 10% of all applicants are audited to ensure they've met the continuing education requirements. In last fiscal year, the BSRB audited 587 individuals. And if you're wondering why that doesn't match exactly with the number of renewals that were processed last year, it's because of, for disciplinary purposes, there are certain individuals that are required to be audited for 1 or 2 time periods. And so we have a mixture of those in there as well. In terms of licensing trends, since 2015, the number of permanent licensees under the BSRB has increased by 24.7%, from 12,152 to 15,155. And during that same time period, the population growth in Kansas is somewhere between 1% and 2%. So I feel like it's really important to stress this. There have been a number of changes, a number of modernized approaches to licensure. But I think when you talk about Kansas and just the demographic changes in the last 7 to 8 years, it's really interesting to see that during the time period, population growth has gone up about 1 to 2%. The number of permanent licenses under the BSRB has increased by almost 25%. And the professions that we have seen with the largest growth include professional counseling, social work, and behavior analysis. In terms of investigations and discipline, as a public protection agency, the BSRB investigates complaints against practitioners under the authority of the board. The agency has administrative authority over practitioners, but this process does not take the place of criminal proceedings or civil proceedings. So if there's ever a question, if someone says, you know, this person committed a crime against me, I'm going to file a complaint with the BSRB. Well, first and foremost, if it is a criminal matter, if they report that to us, and it really does seem like that's more of a matter for law enforcement, we will notify the person. We don't take the place of that process. Also, we are not a party for civil proceedings. So if individuals want to sue someone, our complaint process is not that process. Our process is an administrative function on behalf of the state of Kansas, representing the state versus that person as a licensee under the BSRB. So there are individuals who file a complaint and want to be a party to that, but they're really not a party. Once they submit the complaint and we begin our investigation, it's really between us and that person as a licensee. In 2023, the BSRB received 200 complaints or reports of alleged violation against practitioners. For comparison, practitioners received 205 complaints the previous year, 132 complaints the year before that, and then 199 complaints in FY 2020 and 201 in FY 2019. And if you're wondering why there was a dip in 2021, there's a lot of theories on why that occurred. That was during some of the initial stages of the pandemic. And I think part of the reason for that decrease might be that some people were not able to receive services right away. If they were only receiving in-person services before, people were shifting to receiving telehealth type services, and there may have been a lack of familiarity with that process or what was acceptable practices. I personally, just from hearing people talk, it seems like some people were really happy just to receive any type of services during that time period. There might have been some, accommodations, but for whatever reason, they were lower that year. But I can tell you, in looking at other states, they saw a common dip that year as well. And then after that year, the numbers seem to return back to normal numbers. In terms of complaints, complaints are reviewed to determine whether the BSRB has jurisdiction over the issue and whether the matter involves a potential violation of the statutes and regulations for the profession. Complaints or reports of alleged violation are reviewed by a subset of the board known as the Complaint Review Committee. Some of the examples of common violations that we see are falsifying continuing education requirements. Those come up during the course of an audit. When you renew your license, you sign an attestation that says, at the time that I'm renewing my license, I have completed all of my continuing education hours. And unfortunately, some people sign that attestation when that is not true. And so there are some violations sometimes because of that. Another item we see is practicing without a license or practicing after a license is expired. We also see dual relationships, making sexual advances towards or engaging in physical intimacies with the client, refusing to report termination or suspension. Individuals are required to report those to us under certain circumstances. Confidentiality violations, and practice issues, such as performing services inconsistent with one's education or accepted professional standards. In terms of outreach, in my position, and also Leslie Allen as the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager, we speak to groups of students to provide information on licensing and disciplinary matters, and we provide a proactive approach to assist individuals before they become licensed. Last fiscal year, we had about 16 presentations we provided to either groups of students or other groups in terms of licensing or discipline or other matters involved in the BSRB. And then back in January of 2021, we began a process of broadcasting our meetings on a YouTube channel that we launched. And since that time, we have broadcast or uploaded afterwards about 124, 125 meetings, and they have been viewed over 4,300 times. As I understand it, prior to us having a YouTube channel pre-pandemic, over the course of a year, we might have had about 10 public attendees combined between all the board meetings and advisory committees. And now there's about 1,000 to 1,500 people that are viewing our meetings on a yearly basis. And I'm really proud of that. And I know I compliment the board at having embraced that as a model. I know we're getting a lot more questions from people, but I think that's great. People are able to see conversations that are taking place and are much more aware of some of the conversations and some of the complexities around some of these issues as well. And so, and I think there are individuals that maybe are going through the process of becoming licensed that one day may want to become board members or advisory committee members. And this is a great way for them to be mindful of what's being discussed in some of these forums. So we're going to continue to broadcast meetings, and I have the address there, but honestly, most people can go to YouTube and just type in KS-BSRB or just BSRB, and usually we're the first item that comes up. So I've also received some positive comments from people here in Kansas, and a lot of questions and positive comments from people outside of the state that have seen our model and are interested in starting something similar. On our website, ksbsrb.ks.gov, we have a lot of information and resources. Some of the features on the website, individuals, there's a portal to renew their licenses. They can also get copies of forms and other applicant materials. We have a link to all the statutes and regulations for the profession. The statutes are directly linked from the Reviser of Statutes website, so they're up to date. The regulations are linked to the Secretary of State's website, so those are up to date as well. And then we post any proposed changes to the statutes and regulations, complaints and reports of alleged violation forms. When someone has a public disciplinary matter, we post those under the disciplinary section. And then there's also information on board and advisory committee meetings. Next, I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about some of the documents you received in your packet for this meeting. About 10 to 15 years ago, the board of the BSRB adopted a policy to try to give board members a little bit better expectation of some of the sort of self-imposed items that they wanted board members to strive towards. And this document is called the Expectations of Board Members document. It was updated pretty significantly a couple of years ago, and it is posted on the board's website under the policies. That document does say, insofar as expectations of board members policy document conflicts with any federal or state statutes or regulations, the statute or regulation controls. So this is meant to kind of fall under the statutes and regulations, but as far as further direction, it can be helpful. Under that document, it talks about the guiding principles of the BSRB, and persons in Kansas shall expect that licensed mental health providers are qualified, competent, and professional. Persons regulated by the BSRB shall expect equitable and fair treatment in relation to licensing activities, disciplinary processes, and administrative regulation. The BSRB shall provide services in a manner that is timely, cost-efficient, courteous, and competent. And the BSRB shall be guided by and led by ethical principles, clear policies, progressive thinking, and strategic decision-making. And the BSRB shall respect the dignity and worth of all individuals. For BSRB services, we process license applications and license renewals in a timely manner. We are charged to take disciplinary action when appropriate, provide timely information to the public, and maintain rules and regulations as well as statutes. The document talks about a code of conduct, and it mentions integrity. It says a board member of the BSRB should have no criminal or professional misconduct record, nor commit acts that would lead to investigations or complaints. And a board member of the BSRB possesses sound moral principles, is upright, honest, and sincere. A board member of the BSRB has courage of convictions to withstand pressures to be swayed from the public protection agenda. And a board member of the BSRB should be honest about personal agendas and leave them outside the boardroom. Board member of the BSRB should reveal any actual or perceived conflicts of interest and appropriately recuse themselves from decisions or actions in those areas of interest. A board member of the BSRB should not represent their personal opinion as that of the board. A board member should be limited to one unexcused absence per year. And then under conflicts of interest, a board member of the BSRB should guard against conflicts of interest. Common components of conflicts of interest policies include, but are not limited to, some or all of the following. A board member of the BSRB should have no personal financial benefit as a result of service to the BSRB, except subsistence and mileage. A board member of the BSRB who may have a conflict of interest according to stated criteria should refrain from voting on the matter. Board members of the BSRB should disclose any relationship with any other agency or individual involved with the BSRB and be excluded from matters involving such a conflict. A board member of the BSRB serving as part of an organization working in any way with the BSRB should inform the board chair. And I know sometimes we receive some questions on this item. Given the mental health groupings in Kansas and different roles that you all play, there are going to be different associations that you belong to, even though you're a member of this advisory committee. Board members don't need to report to the board chair every group that they're a part of, but if you are actively involved in leadership, then potentially that could conflict with the role of a board member on the BSRB, and it could potentially pose a conflict of interest. It's always good to disclose those types of items and avoid any conflict. A board member of the BSRB should not accept any gifts or promotional items received as part of their affiliation with the agency for personal use. A board member of the BSRB should not use the agency's name or agency information for personal gain. And then under the area of confidentiality, board discussions involving any of the following matters shall remain confidential unless the board expressly agrees to the contrary. 1, any discussion that occurs during executive session, and 2, any discussion concerning actual or potential litigation. If you're not familiar with executive session, that is a formal action in which the board essentially steps away from the public meeting and will have sort of a private session where they can discuss a limited number of items. And if you're ever wondering if we're in executive session, it should be pretty clear. There's an official motion to go into executive session, and then we'll make sure that everyone is aware of that should that ever come up. The document talks a little bit about the authority of the board chair. The chair of the board shall preside at all meetings, appoint members of the advisory committee, appoint members to the complaint review committee, and any other ad hoc committees. And then the vice chair discharges the duties of the chair in his or her absence, disability, resignation, or death. In the event that the executive director is unable to perform the duties of the office of executive director, the BSRB may request an interim director. And if the BSRB is unable to meet immediately, the board chair will seek an interim director until the board can meet. In terms of the relationship between the board and the executive director, the document outlines that the executive director will communicate any personnel matters that should be addressed by the board to the chair of the board. And then the chair of the board will present these board-related issues to the board, and the executive director will communicate to the staff the board wishes, intentions, policies, etc. And that is what we accomplish here with monthly staff meetings. As far as the delegation to the executive director shall be the administrative head of the organization, serving at all times under the board. The executive director will be responsible for implementing and executing the policies and activities approved by the board. He shall assist in the developing of the overall program and shall recommend policies and activities for consideration by the board. The executive director shall have sole authority to employ, eliminate, and fix the duties and salaries of other employees or independent contractors of the organization, subject to policies, regulations, and limitations approved by the state of Kansas. And just to let you know, in case we ever do hire someone, I do have the ability to submit a proposed salary and hire the proposed person, but the governor's office does still need to sign off on both of those topics. In terms of the executive expectations, the executive director will keep the board advised of all BSRB activities by issuing a report to the board at each full board meeting, which summarizes pertinent information. And the executive director shall prepare the agenda for board meetings in consultation with board chair. Additionally, the executive director prepares the agenda in consultation with the board chair for the annual board retreat or offsite planning meeting, which shall allow for issues before the board that need in-depth consideration. Concerning monitoring of the executive director's performance, the board shall, when necessary, utilize executive session to discuss issues concerning the executive director. The board shall also formally evaluate the performance of the executive director each calendar year and on an annual basis thereafter, with emphasis on whether set outcomes are attained. And as part of our being state employees, each of the employees of the BSRB receives a yearly performance evaluation, and then the board performs a performance evaluation of me on a yearly basis as well. Next, we're going to switch to the second document in your packet. It's the advisory committee policy. It's a 2-page document, and it outlines a little bit more of expectations of membership and then also the reason why the advisory committees exist. So the advisory committees exist to assist the work of the board, and the board utilizes 7 standing advisory committees, 1 for each of the professions regulated by the board. The advisory committee policy is posted on the BSRB website, and as of just a little bit ago, there were 53 individuals, not counting board members, who volunteer to serve on the advisory committees for the board. Concerning the purpose of the advisory committees, a BSRB advisory committee as a creation of the board has the purpose of supporting the board and carrying out its mission to protect the public. Members serve at the pleasure of the board. Actions pertaining to informing, licensing, and disciplining of those persons regulated by the board are the methods for accomplishing the mission. An advisory committee fulfills its purpose by addressing issues referred to it by the board through the advisory committee chair or the executive director. Committee may suggest issues it believes the board should consider by referring those through the chair of the advisory committee. If the advisory committee wishes to submit a recommendation on a change back to the board, if the board receives that, the board has three options. One, agree the issue needs to be addressed at the board level. Two, agree the issue should be addressed and refer the matter to the appropriate person or committee for additional information, review, or analysis, which will then be brought to the board. Or three, decide to not address the issue. In terms of the structure of the advisory committees, chairs of the advisory committees are members of the board. If the profession is represented on the board, the chair of the advisory committee is a board member licensed in the discipline of the committee and appointed by the governor to represent the discipline on the board. Any other board members appointed by the governor to represent that discipline on the board will serve as members of that advisory committee. A public member of the board will also be a member. There will be a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10 additional members appointed. And then the executive director will be a non-voting ex officio member. The assistant director and licensing manager is encouraged to attend, and legal counsel representing the board should attend meetings when their attendance is requested. Terms for advisory committee membership are 2 years, and members will be appointed by the chair of the BSRB, and they can serve up to 4 total terms. Appointments to the committee should be staggered to avoid having too many members of the advisory committee reach their maximum length of service at the same time. And then I'm just going to stress the next slide here. So there is some language that I've bolded and italicized. It says the policies and procedures under which the BSRB board members are expected to operate will apply also to the advisory committee members. So you may be wondering, why did we go into so much detail about the expectations of board members? Well, because partly there are board members that serve on this advisory committee, but secondly, in your role as an advisory committee member, your document that talks about the advisory committees does say the policies and procedures under which the BSRB board members are expected to operate will apply also to the advisory committee members. Now, some of these are going to be exclusive to board members. For example, you're not going to be serving on the complaint review committee or hearing panels for the board. However, when the board document that talks about conflicts of interest and integrity and things like that, just be mindful of those types of things too, so that you're holding yourself to the same standards that board members are held to as well. In terms of selection of advisory committee members, members of the advisory committee may be nominated by anyone, including the public, committee members, members of a professional organization, either the discipline's own or others, or through self-nomination. In reviewing nominations, the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. Members should provide representation of the levels of licensing for that discipline, and those members should be selected from among public and private practitioners and educators. The committee of a whole discusses nominations and reaches recommendations on new members. The nominee's resume, a letter stating the reasons why he or she desires to be appointed, and a copy of the board's mission and goals to which the nominee has indicated agreement are reviewed. The chair of the committee will submit the committee's recommendation for new members to the BSRB board chair. The chair will review the recommendations and may request input before making a decision, which will be announced at a board meeting. After the appointment has been approved, the executive director will inform the advisory committee appointee by letter or email. The executive director will assist the new member by providing information, which will help orient the member to the board and the advisory committee's role and function. Next, I'm going to direct your attention to that third document that you received in your training material. It's a short little one-page document front and back that talks about guidelines for attendees of meetings. So we have had more individuals who have been watching and wanted to participate in our meetings. And we've had a little bit of confusion at times in terms of what information is appropriate for public comment at meetings, and also the authority of the advisory committees versus the board. So we created a document somewhat modeled after what the legislature has for public attendees at the legislative meeting. And I just want to provide this document to you as well, so you'll know what's posted on the website. The guidelines for public attendees of meetings policy document clarifies that public comment is not entitled to individuals, but it may be approved. It also outlines the processes that should be followed during comments to the board or advisory committees, and the topics relevant for public comment to the board or advisory committees. The document also clarifies that the board wants to receive valid complaints against practitioners and provides information on how those complaints are to be submitted. but informs potential attendees that certain matters concerning a specific licensee will be considered in a closed, standardized process to ensure fairness to members of the public and licensees. So there may be multiple matters of interest, but all of those may not be appropriate for an advisory committee meeting. And there's also certain protections for members of the public and licensees. And that's why we have certain processes. And so not everything is appropriate to be handled during the public meetings. And so we try to explain a little bit about that. And now I'm going to shift to some general information about serving on a licensing board, or I think a lot of this applies to you as well on the advisory committee. So we'll talk a little bit about how the state looks at licensing boards, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the laws and things to be mindful of, such as the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, the Kansas Open Records Act, or KORA, and also the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act. So concerning professional licensing boards, the state of Kansas regulates many professions. Each of these professions is regulated by a licensing board or commission that was created by the Kansas legislature for the purpose of ensuring that licensed professionals are competent and do not pose a risk to the public. A professional licensing board is created by enabling legislation, which establishes the board's form, mission, powers, function, tool of implementation, and enforcement abilities. A board is considered to be a creature of statute, meaning a board's power is dependent upon its authorized statute, and therefore any exercise of authority claimed by a board must come from those statutes, either explicitly or necessarily implied. A board may administer, implement, and enforce only those statutes. If those statutes are silent on a particular action, the board lacks authority to take such action. Simply put, a board can only do what the statutes say it can do. Besides statutes specific to a board's authority is limited by constitutional equal protection and due process rights, prohibiting a board from acting in a manner which results in disparate or inconsistent treatment of persons that are similarly situated, from adopting different standards for similar situations, or otherwise acting arbitrarily, capriciously, or vindictively. For example, a licensing board may not impose more severe discipline on male licensees simply because of their gender, or a licensing board may not revoke a license simply because the board does not like that particular person. Other constitutional guarantees, such as freedom of speech, rights to privacy, unreasonable search and seizure, and vagueness, also establish parameters in the board's authority. The Kansas legislature does retain control over certain aspects of a licensing board, such as modifying the enabling legislation, which would change the purpose of the board, limiting expenditures in an appropriations bill, or enacting new legislation to change the makeup, scope, or powers of the board. In order to carry out its purpose, a board is granted or delegated powers and functions that parallel the three branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative. Under executive authority, the board carries out its enabling act. It follows the Kansas Open Meeting Act, KOMA, or follows the Kansas Open Records Act, KORA. Some of the judicial authority, the agency has quasi-judicial hearings in reviewing facts when violations of the law have occurred, and the agency also follows the Administrative Procedures Act, or CAPA, when appropriate. Under the legislative authority or administrative authority, the agency is asked to adopt regulations to implement or interpret the Enabling Act with more detail or specific requirements. This process involves holding an open hearing on proposed regulations, allowing feedback, and there is oversight by a legislative committee. In order to fulfill its responsibility to protect the public from incompetent, unprofessional, and unauthorized practitioners, the regulatory board implements and enforces statutes and regulations, and at times operates according to internal policies. In order to be effective, board members need to understand the differences between statutes, regulations, and policies. Concerning statutes, statutes are laws passed by the Kansas legislature through authority derived from the Kansas Constitution and subsequently signed by the governor. Statutes generally become effective on July 1st of that session year, but can become effective if a different date is specified in the regulation. Statutes set the parameters of the board's authority. Statutes control any inconsistent regulation or policy. If a board becomes dissatisfied with the scope of the authority, for example, a board determines that it needs investigative subpoena authority, the board must seek legislation to accomplish its goal. We talked about the statute, and now the regulations are under the statutory authority. Regulations, on the other hand, are adopted by a board to further implement or carry out the purpose of a particular statute. The board's authority to adopt regulations is derived by statute. In adopting rules and regulations, a board follows the Rules and Regulations Filing Act to ensure that the process of adopting regulations is open, receptive to public and legislative input, addresses the economic impact of board and those affected. The regulations themselves are consistent in style, organization, and grammar, are lawful, and are filed and published. Regulations are promulgated to complete or fill in details of a statutory scheme, implementing statutes and affected rights or responsibilities of third parties outside of the board. So when adopted in accordance with the Rules and Regulations Filing Act, regulations have the force and effect of law. They are legally enforceable. To be valid, a regulation must be within the statutory authority conferred upon the board, implement a specific statute, and otherwise pass the test for legality. Any regulation that goes beyond the authority granted violates an enabling statute or is inconsistent with the statutory power of the board, another statute, or the Constitution will be found void. Policies, on the other hand, may be adopted by the board only to guide its internal operations, such as prioritizing staff workload or explaining the investigative process. Guidance documents are documents that guide the board's current approach to or interpretations of law, or general statements of policy that describe how and when the board will exercise discretionary functions. Next, we'll talk about some suggestions on how to become an effective board member or advisory committee member. It is recommended that you read the board's enabling statutes. Those are found on the BSRB website, but they begin with KSA 74-71 or 7501. It's also recommended that you read the board's licensing acts. These are the statutes for each of the professions, and there are links to these on the board's website. And then it's also recommended that you read the regulations for the particular licensing act, for this case, the Behavior Analyst Act. And then we'd recommend that you read the BSRB policies that are posted on the BSRB website. Be on alert for agency policies and internal procedures which may be inconsistent with or conflict with the board's statutes and regulations, or which affect requirements or applicants for licensees. Be willing to initiate action or amend statutes or modify regulations. If a statute or regulation seems confusing or vague, it could appear that way to individuals who must comply with them. And remember, the purpose of imposing discipline against licensees is to encourage compliance with the law and protect the public. Discipline should not be vindictive or disproportionate to the severity of the violations. Always be mindful that the role of the board is to protect the public and not the licensees. Concerning the topic of conflict of interest, conflicts of interest typically mean having an interest, financial or otherwise, direct or indirect, or engaging in any business or transaction or professional activity, or incurring any obligation or any nature, which is in substantial conflict with the proper discharge of the board member duties and the public interest. Board members or advisory committee members must make public and recuse themselves from any conflict of interest that exists to ensure the integrity of the board and all its decisions. Disclosure and recusal are important tools to avoid actual or perceived conflicts of interest, but board members must not overuse recusal as an excuse to avoid conflict in exercising their full responsibility. Personal conflicts are those actions that may ultimately have a personal consequence that is a direct or indirect effect of a decision or action. No decision should be made that will advance the personal benefit of the board members. Some examples of personal conflicts could be personal gain, bias, or effects on personal relationships. Concerning confidentiality, at all times, the board member or advisory committee member must conform to the rules of confidentiality and dealings outside the boardroom. Protected information obtained in the capacity of board membership must remain confidential during and after board membership. Termination of membership does not dissolve the board member from responsibility. The rules that applied during active board membership continue to apply after termination of membership. Confidentiality must be maintained on all confidential subjects that the individual is privy to as a member. Some examples of times when confidential information could be discussed. We talked about executive sessions, that there's a motion to move from an open meeting to an executive session. So confidential information could be discussed during executive session, and also deliberations after a hearing. So the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, and the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act, or CAPA, Allow the board to deliberate in private in order to reach a decision in a particular pending case. Concerning professional activities, a board member may hold an office in a professional or trade association of the regulated profession, but may not lobby for or cast votes regarding a matter that would impact the professional association or the board member's office in that association. The board member may not use his or her position on the board to further the interest of the professional association or his or her office in that association. Board members may attend professional conferences and social events, but they must be mindful of open meetings rules and conflicts of interest. If a majority of board members are present, do not discuss the business or affairs of the board to avoid triggering a meeting under the COMA. Additionally, do not discuss matters related to a particular pending application or disciplinary matter. A board member should not represent himself or herself as a spokesperson of the board unless authorized by vote of the board to speak on the board's behalf. If the board member is asked to give the board's position on an issue and the board has not authorized that member to do so, the board member must decline to comment or make clear that any opinions expressed are those of himself or herself alone and not of the board. A board member should not ask board staff or board counsel to provide legal advice or preferential treatment to any applicant or licensee. Now let's talk a little bit about the COMA, the Kansas Open Meeting Act. COMA allows the public to observe governmental entities making decisions. So meetings shall be open to the public because according to the statute, the representative government is dependent upon an informed electorate. Because the purpose of COMA is to benefit the public, it is interpreted liberally and exceptions are applied narrowly to carry out its purpose. The COMA applies to all legislative and administrative bodies and agencies of the state and other subordinate groups thereof receiving or expending and supported in whole or in part by public funds. The COMA does not define the term subordinate group, but if created by a covered entity or the group has become an extension of the covered entity, most likely the subordinate group is subject to the COMA. For our purposes, the board is a covered entity and you as advisory committee members are in a group that would fit under the COMA. So we will be following the COMA in terms of the advisory committees. The COMA does not apply to an otherwise covered entity when exercising quasi-judicial functions or conducting a proceeding or hearing under the CAPA, the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act. COMA also does not apply to the judiciary, private organizations, and staff meetings of a covered entity. I would take note of the following slide. A meeting is defined as it has to have these three criteria for something to be considered a meeting under COMA. One, any gathering or assembling in person through the use of a telephone or other medium of interactive communication. Two, by a majority of the membership of an agency or public body subject to the act. Three, for the purpose of discussing the business or affairs of the public body or agency. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but for something to be a meeting under COMA, it would need to have all three elements there. So meetings may be conducted by telephone or other electronic medium. If the board complies with all COMA requirements, a meeting includes informal discussions before, after the public meeting, or during a recess of a public meeting, and all gatherings at all stages of the decision-making process. The name of the gathering is irrelevant. Thus, a work session, a retreat are subject to the COMA. So when we said the offsite planning meeting was open to the public, one of the reasons for that is because even though it's offsite and it's not a traditional regular board meeting, it is still under the COMA and it is still a public meeting. A discussion does not require binding action or voting. A discussion can occur at social gatherings, retreats, and meetings held in private, educational conferences or seminars. Thus, when traveling to such meetings, members of the board should avoid discussing business or affairs of the agency. The presiding officer has the duty to provide notice of the meeting, but this duty may be delegated. The COMA does not require notice of meetings to be published in a paper or on a website. An individual must request notice of meetings. There are no formalities to requesting notice that can be done verbally or written. So on behalf of the board and the advisory committees, myself and my staff take care of the notice for open meetings. And so you may have seen on our website, we publish the agendas for the meeting. We also have a calendar where we list the dates of upcoming meetings. There is also an email that we send out to anyone who has specifically requested notice of advisory committee meetings or board meetings. And so we send notices to that email. And then also we use a website called the Kansas Public Square. And if you're not familiar with the Public Square is a state website that lists upcoming meetings such as boards and commissions. And so we provide notice to that as well. The notice must provide the date, time, and location where the body will meet to the person requesting notice in a reasonable time before the meeting. A request is valid for 1 fiscal year. The board must notify a requester of expiration before terminating notice to that requester. The COMA does not address meeting procedures. A board is not required to follow Robert's Rules of Order or any other similar formal rules of procedure. The COMA does not require a board to create an agenda, but if one exists, it must be made available to everyone. A person may record the meeting if doing so is not disruptive. The public does not have the right to speak, but only to listen and observe, and the board cannot vote by secret ballot. A board policy may require minutes to be kept, but the COMA does not require the board to have minutes unless there is a motion to go into executive session. The motion as made must be included in the minutes. An executive session permits discussion of certain enumerated matters outside of public view. To make an executive session or take an executive session, the board must first convene an open meeting. The board cannot take any binding actions in an executive session, but a consensus is allowed. If a consensus is achieved, the board must reconvene the open meeting and take a formal vote during the open session. Prosecutions under the COMA are civil, not criminal. Any person, county, district attorney, or the attorney general may bring an action in district court. The county or district attorney and attorney general have subpoena power, and enforcement actions take precedence over all other cases and are assigned for trial at the earliest practical date. The remedy for a COMA violation include voiding any action taken if prosecuted by the attorney general or county district attorney, an injunction stopping the action, a mandamus, forcing action, or a declaratory judgment. And then the penalties for any kind of a COMA violation include a fine up to $500 per board member, not the board, for each violation, ouster from office, recall from office, court costs assessed to the person seeking an enforcement of COMA, court costs assessed against the plaintiff if maintaining the action frivolously, not in good faith, or without reasonable basis in fact or law. So before we move to the Open Records Act, I just want to let you know, we take care of most of the COMA items here in the BSRB office. We do take this very seriously. One way that we try to help you all out is posting in the public notice, but also making it very clear, what types of communications you need to avoid so that you don't accidentally have an issue with the Kansas Open Meetings Act. I stressed that one slide that talked about what constitutes a meeting. And part of the reason for that is because I think when most people think of a meeting, when you're all in a room together and you're talking about the board business, that makes a lot of sense. But now, since we have a lot more technology, if you have interactions where there is a discussion back and forth, and there is a majority of members of the committee that are talking about the action relevant to the group, that would really be an open meeting. And that's why we can't have email communication for the majority of members of the committee, where we're discussing things backwards and forth, because that would be interactive communication. It would be a majority of members of the committee, and it would be on matters involving the topic area for the committee. So since we are an agency that falls under this and it relates to the board and the advisory committees, you have to be mindful of not having back and forth discussions with the rest of the body. You need to reserve those conversations for the meetings themselves. But if you have questions, you are always free to reach out to me, and I can help you with information. Or if there's something that you would like distributed to the members of the group, feel free to send me an email, and then I can send it to the other members of the group. And this is not to say that you can't reach out to 1 or 2 people from a committee. If you ever want to talk to the chair of the committee or just a couple people from the committee, that's perfectly fine too. Where you really start to run into an issue is when you have a majority of members of the committee and it's involving discussion outside of a public meeting, and it involves the business of the committee. So just wanted to stress that before we go on to the next item. The Kansas Open Records Act, or KORA, it is a law that requires the board to have its records open for inspection by any person unless otherwise provided, and KORA shall be liberally construed and applied to promote such policy. A public agency includes the state or any political or taxing subdivision of the state, or any office, officer, agency, or instrumentality thereof, or any other entity receiving, expending, or supporting in whole or in part by public funds appropriated by the state or political taxing subdivision, and the term instrumentality is not defined in CORA. Nevertheless, if created by a covered entity or the group has become an extension of a covered entity, it will most likely be covered. A public agency does not include private companies, even if they receive public funds or exchange for goods and services. Judges and courts, an individual legislator, or member of a governing body, private individuals, or state employees. A public record includes any recorded information, regardless of form or characteristics, which is made, maintained, or kept by, or is in the possession of any public agency, and written records, photographs, computer data, and email. So a public record does not include records that are owned by a private person or entity and are not related to functions, activities, programs, or operations funded by public funds, or records not in existence at the time of the request. The board is not required to create a record in order to fulfill a request. Under the CORA, the board must appoint a Freedom of Information officer to assist with CORA requests, and we have done that. Leslie Allen is the official officer to assist with those CORA requests. We must display, distribute, or otherwise make available a brochure describing the requester rights, agency responsibilities, and procedures for inspecting or obtaining copies of public records. And we do have that posted in the agency's office at the front desk. And that document must include the name and title of a records custodian, fees, and office hours available for anyone to make a request. And that also is included in that document. In Kansas, any person may make a request. The person need not be a resident or provide a reason for their request. The board may require the request to be in writing, state name and address of the requester, provide proof of identification, and sign a written certification that the requester will not use the names and addresses obtained from the records to solicit sales or services. Unless closed by law, the board cannot deny a person the right to review its public records. For instance, copyrighted material may not be reproduced without permission from the copyright holder, but must be available for viewing or listening. If portions of a record are closed, the remainder of the record must be made available to the requester, and that's referred to as redacting the document. The board is not required to make copies of a recording of tapes or discs, videotapes or films, pictures, slides, graphics, illustrations, unless they are shown at a public meeting. And then if we receive a request, the request must be acted upon as soon as possible, but not later than the end of the third business day following the date the request is received by the board. 3 responses are acceptable. 1, the record is provided in the form requested if possible. 2, the request is under review and the records, if permitted, will follow. Or 3, the request is denied with a detailed explanation for the denial. So it's important to note, when we receive Kansas Open Records requests, we do respond to them, and we are not required to provide all the records within 3 days, but we are required to provide a response within 3 days that meets one of these 3 criteria. Under the CORA, there is a presumption of openness. As such, the requested public records must be released unless an exemption to disclosure applies. The burden rests on the board to prove the requested records are exempt from disclosure. Exemptions to disclosure may be discretionary or mandatory. It's noted here that the CORA is a civil act, not a criminal act, and a lot of the language is very similar to what you saw under violations for the COMA. Additionally, the penalties and fines for violations of the CORA could be $500 per violation for knowing violation or intentional failure to furnish information. There's also some information here about court costs, and also there can be a fine imposed if the board's denial is not made in good faith or without a reasonable basis in fact or law. So before we turn to CAPA, there's 2 items I wanted to make sure to stress about CORA. Most of the requests for CORA will come directly to the board, and we will take care of those. But should you ever receive a CORA request on behalf of your membership on the board or on the advisory committee, please forward that to me as soon as possible. That way we can have our staff start to work on that. And then in terms of your own correspondence, you are all professionals, but I think it's always helpful to remind people that when it comes to records, a record is not always a formal document. As you saw some of the explanation here, a record could be an email. So please also make sure that when you're communicating about items involving the advisory committee or the BSRB, that you're always using professional terminology and professional language, because any of those types of documents could potentially be subject to an open records request. And you want to make sure that if that information is out there publicly, that it has the best look possible. So if you do have any questions about open records requests, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll help you with that. And then the next item is the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act, or the CAPA, and that creates procedural rights and imposes only procedural duties. The CAPA does not provide substantive law, and those laws are governed by the Board's Enabling Act and Licensing Act. The CAPA applies only to the extent that other statutes expressly provide the provisions of the CAPA govern those provisions. The general rule is that licensing boards like the BSRB must do business in an open meeting under the COMA unless directed by statute to conduct the proceedings or hearings pursuant to the CAPA. The two acts are mutually exclusive. So when a licensing board statutes provide that the CAPA applies to certain decisions, the board will follow CAPA, not the COMA, when making those decisions. The CAPA sets out a procedure to follow when the board is deciding what to do, usually in cases involving individual licensees, much like the procedure that is followed in court cases. In those types of cases, the board is conducting a quasi-judicial function and deciding the outcome of a case. So when the CAPA applies, none of the stages in a particular case has to be open to the public observation other than a hearing. Each of the board's licensing acts has a CAPA provision. Under the CAPA, neither the public nor an applicant has to be notified when the board meets to consider an application for licensure. Similar, under the CAPA, neither the public nor the licensee has to be notified when the complaint review committee meets to consider whether the probable cause exists in a disciplinary case or issue summary proceeding order. Additionally, the board and the CRC do not need to take a vote in public for decisions made under the CAPA. Under the CAPA, decisions are made when the license or an order is issued. The necessary board staff and the board or the CRC's attorney can be present during the CAPA discussions to make sure the board members have the information or legal advice when they need to make an informed decision. There are some board activities that are not covered by the CAPA, and these must be acted on in an open meeting under the COMA. These include approving board minutes, discussing and voting, or approving to amend regulations or guidance documents, delegating authority to a board member or to the executive director for particular action, receiving an agency update regarding the budget, legislation, statistics on complaints and CRC activity, education, and the executive director's report, decisions whether to renew contracts and change the way contracted services are provided, and policy decisions affecting the way the board operates internally. Concerning applicants for licensure, a person who files an application for licensure has the burden of proof, and staff will gather information submitted by the applicant for the board's consideration in determining whether an applicant is qualified for licensure or whether the license may be conditioned or restricted. If the board denies, conditions, or restricts a license, an applicant may request a hearing if the applicant did not agree to such action in a consent agreement and order. Under investigation, the board has the burden of proof to show the licensee has violated the statute or regulation. All licensing boards can investigate complaints or allegations that a licensee has violated the statutes or regulations. The board's investigator generally gathers information, then presents that information to the CRC. The CRC reviews the information and determines whether there's probable cause or reasonable grounds to believe that a licensee has violated specific statutes or regulations. And reasonable grounds mean information that would lead a reasonably prudent person to believe that the licensee violated one of the board's statutes or regulations. When making the determination, the CRC must make sure the conduct the licensee is accused of actually violates one of the board's statutes or regulations. The fact that the licensee did something that made someone angry, violated a professional association's ethical code, or did not follow an employer's policy does not necessarily mean the licensee violated a statute or a regulation. The licensee can request a hearing on the summary proceeding order within a certain prescribed time period. And once a petition or request for hearing is filed, CAPA guides the proceeding and the hearing. If there is an immediate danger to public health, safety, and welfare, the CRC may suspend the license without giving the licensee notice and opportunity for a hearing, but a licensee may request an appeal, and they can appeal an emergency order in the district court. And then the last item I'll talk about before I end the training has to do with the Kansas Tort Claims Act. So the Kansas Tort Claims Act generally governs the liability of the state of Kansas and its agencies and employees. If an employee includes a member of a board or a committee of a governmental entity, including elected or appointed officials and persons acting on behalf or of in service to a governmental entity and any official capacity, whether with or without compensation. So we do have an attorney general's opinion on this topic, whether advisory committee members are covered under the Tort Claims Act. And under that attorney general's opinion that is posted, it does say that they believe the advisory committee members would be covered. So I think this is relevant for you to just get a little brief explanation on. The basic rule of the Kansas Tort Claims Act is that vicarious liability for any actionable wrongful act or omission of governmental employees within the scope of their employment and course of their employment, subject to affirmative grants of immunity that exist on a case-by-case basis. If you are sued for an act that occurred within the scope of your duties as a board member, you are entitled to have the state defend you at no cost. However, there are requirements for that to happen. So to obtain representation by the state, you must submit a written request within 15 days after a service of process and cooperate in your defense. The state may choose not to defend you if you acted with actual fraud or malice, or you failed to make a timely request for representation. The general rule is that the state will pay for any judgment rendered against you, unless the judgment is for an act or omission that occurred outside the scope of your duties as a board member. 2, you failed to cooperate in your defense. Or 3, you acted with actual fraud or malice. So this item has not come up since I have been with the BSRB. I hope that it will never come up, but just in case it does, I think it's important for you to understand this because there are certain timeframes that they have in law. And so should you ever get sued based on your membership on the board or membership as an advisory committee member of the board, please let us know that as soon as possible. That way we can talk with legal counsel and help make sure you get connected as quickly as possible. So I realize that is a tremendous amount of information. Like I said, this PowerPoint is posted on the website for the BSRB. It's a lot of good, helpful information, but some of it you may need some time to think about. If you do have questions, I'm happy to help you with them now. If you have them later, feel free to reach out to me by email.
Does anybody have any questions for David? I just want to point out, because I've been around for a little bit on this committee, one of the pieces that he went over, I think it was somewhere between slide 98 and 108 when you were talking about the meetings. That really became an issue for us as a subcommittee when we were talking about the rules and the regulations and what each one of those meant and wordsmithing what we wanted it to mean. And it may come up again when we start talking about like reinstating licenses or continuing ed or, you know, any of these items that are on our discussion list. If you have a strong opinion about it and you have somebody else that has a strong opinion about it, for example, like Christy and I were talking about, I can't remember which one it was that Christy and I were reviewing, and Christy did such a good job going over to Missouri. What was that, Christy? You're on mute.
Are you talking about the unprofessional guidelines?
Yeah, the unprofessional guidelines, and those still aren't finalized, are they?
That was a
No.
question I had.
Yeah, but I think we're going to talk about those in December. But anyway, so there are going to be things that you guys as behavior analysts have strong opinions on, and that you may want to chat with another committee member about it before you come to the subcommittee meeting, so that you have your talking points straight. But you can't do that, right? Because if you do that, then you're violating slide number 108, or I think is what it is. So I just want to caution you that we're bound by rules that we're not used to being bound by. And that's one of them. Is that a fair representation, David?
I think so, yeah. Because I think some people have been part of groups before to where there were meetings, but there was a lot of work that was done outside of the meetings and in preparation for the meeting. And so there was a lot of communications in other groups to make sure that things were ready for the meetings. And that can still happen. It just, we have to be careful about how that occurs, because if something were to involve the majority of members, then they wouldn't be able to have those types of communications based on the nature of us being under the comb. So if it was essentially less than half of the membership, you would still be able to talk to each other. It really becomes an issue once you have a majority of members of the committee, because in a sense, it's kind of like having discussions that are intended for a public meeting even though they're not public because they're by email. So that is something to be mindful of, but it doesn't mean that you can't reach out to one person or two people. There can be a few people that work. It's just you got to be watching to make sure you don't involve the majority of members of the committee.
Right, which is why Christy and I could, like, we looked at Missouri and kind of, wordsmith some of the stuff on there, and that was okay, because then it came and it was presented to the bigger group. I just want to caution you guys, because for me personally, it was not something that I'd come up with before, because I had been used to doing huddles, behavior analyst huddles around legislation and testimony. Right. And so this is different. And so I just want to put that at the front of everybody's brain as we move forward. So if nobody has any questions on that, nope. Congratulations, you guys are now official. You've done the required training of the behavior of the board and the psych board. So we're ready to move on to some old business. Christy, there were some things that, because we knew this was going to, when we developed the agenda, since we knew this meeting was going to go long, as a matter of fact, we only have 10 minutes left, right? That we thought, well, we really want to be able to give it a robust discussion.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the ones that we got pushed off to the December meeting. So
Sounds good.
Some of these other ones we think that we can kind of work our way through pretty quickly. And you should have in your packet of information that David sent out, it's A2A KDHE Children's Behavioral Interventionist Program. How many on this call had heard of this before today? This kind of came out of the blue. And can I share my screen, David? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You should be able to now.
All right. So this came to our attention, and so when you look down through here, one of the things that it said was that in order to be qualified to be this behavioral interventionist, that the provider qualifications were 40 hours of successful training. It used to say behavioral training, and then it's got, this 12 hours of curriculum, crisis prevention, but it should include understanding behavioral strategies and interventions, right? So, and then it said they were to be overseen by LMHPs, which are licensed mental health providers. So when you go out and look at the licensed mental health provider, there was a list of people that would be qualified to be licensed mental health providers. And so because of the advocacy of the behavior analytic community in submitting letters and documentation to the state, when this was under draft form, we were able to successfully include that under the licensed mental health qualifications, that a licensed behavior analyst meets those qualifications. So that is really, really exciting, you guys, because what this means is that we're now on the brink in the state of Kansas to being able to be licensed to provide and get reimbursed for services that are outside of autism. Is that exciting?
Linda,
Yes.
that's
Very
very,
cool.
very exciting, but I just want to confirm, I cannot believe it. So is that the interpretation, correct interpretation?
That we're allowed to oversee those programs? Yes.
Outside of autism?
Yes, it's so in order here, let me share my screen again. The individuals that to be served are let's go up to the top. Let's look at it. It's number one, these are for probably the high acuity kids as well. So you can only bill once a day, but you can get $445. And it's for any individual based on determination of medical necessity that or other license, you know, you have a recommendation by a licensed behavioral health practitioner, and it's almost like intensive, like Christy, intensive parent training. It's for individuals and families that are struggling with behavioral and emotional management issues as established in a person-centered treatment plan. Assistance is provided with developing redirection skills and teaching positive behaviors requiring family involvement. The active engagement is assists in rewiring, blah, blah, blah. The goal is for the child or youth to live safely in home settings that increase their behavioral function appropriately in daily living activities and are designed to assist in preventing hospital or institutional treatment. The child receives a functional assessment score, a CAFAS score of 71 or higher, or if they're in preschool, 71 or higher. And then the strengths and difficulties questionnaire must be administered. Nowhere in any of the qualifications for the individual receiving services does it say autism. And so this is like huge, guys. Just want to say that. Maybe I should say that a little bit more professionally since I'm the chair of the committee. Fellow chairpersons, this is a significant step forward, I think, for behavior analysts in the state of Kansas, right? Because now this is giving us the opportunity to work with those high acuity kids and that do not necessarily have a diagnosis of autism. And so I just, you know, congratulations for those of you who were members of the advocacy with this and wrote letters on our behalf, and you were successful in getting licensed behavior analysts included in the definition, the state definition of licensed mental health professionals, which opens the door now for services like this. So I just wanted to say, share that actually really good news, right, as in a discussion of old business. So
Linda, I have a question.
Sure.
So how does that, I mean, this is new. I don't expect you to have all the answers, but in terms of billing, what's the implication for billing? Because like, are we going to be allowed to be billing like 9715 blah 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 to
No,
other populations?
The billing code is in here. So David sent this out in that packet of stuff. Yeah. So the maybe the billing code's not in here, but there is
H2108.
H2. Yeah. Where is that, Christy? The last page?
It's first paragraph.
First paragraph. Sorry,
I should have.
Oh, yep. There it is. Yep. So you bill that code. You have to get and there's the provider type 1, 2, 3, the third line down. As a licensed behavior analyst, now you can enroll in provider type, provider specialty of PT/PS 11-/130. Right? And then once you're enrolled as that provider type, then what you can do is for somebody that's been authorized for this service, you can bill that code. So that's my understanding of this KMAP bulletin. It's KMAP General Bulletin 23230. And I think that this is one of those things that there's going to be, the behavior analytic community should be abuzz with this, right? So this is one of those things that they can take out and disseminate, right, David?
Yes, yeah, that's all public. It's been
Yeah.
posted on our website now too, so feel free to share it with anybody you want to.
Yeah. So,
So does
Good
that mean
news.
that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Good news. I just want to say that it's fantastic and opens up behavior analysts to being able to work at, your run-of-the-mill psychology agencies. So it's another plus for us in the field.
it is, Mike, and just think about it, like how many times, I don't know about you, but like I've been around for forever, like how many times that people have asked me to come help with maybe one of the kids that's in a PRTF that may be trying to transition home, and there was no way for me to bill as a behavior analyst.
Right.
Now
Just
there
kind of
is.
pigeonholed into that autism deal. And
Yeah,
this is very helpful to get us out of that because we're behavior analysts, not autism analysts.
yeah, I agree.
My gosh, this is so wonderful that I'm like, is it real? I'm still trying to.
Here's the thing, it became effective October 1st.
Okay, it's already effective now.
It's
Okay.
already effective. It's already finalized. It's already into service. So it's really something that we need to, as a behavior analyst, as licensed behavior analysts, right? And part of this committee is making sure that other behavior analysts in the field understand that we now have this open to us to be able to help more consumers, right? Not just individuals that are impacted by autism.
I feel like Kanzava should do something with this.
Yeah, that'd be.
Yes, I agree. You were reading my mind. I'm sorry my video has stopped working, but I'm still here. Yes,
I'm glad
I think
you're here, Kelly.
I think we can give this to our legislative committee and get it disseminated to our members for sure, and get it up on our website, at least as the first few steps.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Good.
maybe in the future, there could be a webinar or something to explain how this actually works.
That's a good idea,
That's
Alice.
a great idea. Yeah.
Linda, do you know who we'd reach out to with like more questions or to get more information in regards to this new
The new service.
option?
The person, I think that what you would do is reach out to like it's probably that generic number at the bottom on page 3 where it says customer service.
Okay.
That might be, but that's probably a good thing to try to get information on, Christy, is who do we reach out to in order to be able to get enrolled? I know that at the nonprofit that I am affiliated with out in the field, that they're already, this came up and they're already trying to enroll people.
Nice.
So, yeah. So I think for any of the agencies that are represented here, that would be a good thing, and to get it out to people around the state, because our services, it's something that we've discussed over time, is that we're like Mike said, we're not autism analysts, right? We're behavior analysts, and that what we provide is not a tool in your tool belt. It's a scientific analysis of behavior and the environmental variables which contribute to the occurrence or non-occurrence of that behavior, right? I mean, it's science, so it's going to work for everybody. And I just think this is really exciting for us as behavior analysts in Kansas. So on that happy note, what do we do, David, when we don't even get to the, I mean, that was a big one, right? Under old business. Do we move item 8, B and C and item 9, new business, to December?
Yeah, I think we can just move the remaining items to the next meeting.
Okay.
Just what I would ask the members to do is go ahead and just review the regulations, the 102-8-9 on continuing education, and then the 102-8-10 on documentation of continuing education. Just go ahead and read through those. We're trying to see if there's any language that needs to be updated, any references, if anything is missing or anything is outdated that should be removed. We're just trying to do some legislative cleanup on those items mostly. And then at the last meeting, we talked about a couple of new regulations that would be helpful to be added now that we have some additional authority that got added to the bill. And so in your packet of material, you also see a copy of a new potential regulation that Christy was nice enough to draft for us that has to do with pointing out when individuals are physically located in the state that we look to see where the location of the client is and determining if the practitioner has to be licensed in Kansas to provide services to that person. And it's kind of modeled after a similar regulation that exists for some of their professions, but one that currently not exist for behavior analysts. And then there is an example regulation too, which has to do with license reinstatement. And there's a few different ways licenses could be reinstated. One would be if you had a license that expired, but there's also cases where someone had a license that was suspended or a license that was revoked. And so there's sort of a three different processes depending upon what your license, what status your license is for it to be reinstated. So go ahead and read through some of that language too. It's modeled after what currently exists for some of their professions. And then for the next meeting in December, as was discussed earlier, the unprofessional conduct regulations for the professions have been discussed previously, and this advisory committee came up with some recommendations on changes. And then there was a packet of material that includes your recommended changes with the recommended changes from other professions. And the board had asked the advisory committees to review those, like to see if the ones for psychologists would be helpful to be brought over to the behavior analyst, or addiction counseling if some other discussions will be helpful. So before the next meeting, I'll send you that information so you can review that. And so that way in December, you can have a discussion and reach recommendations on any further changes to the unprofessional conduct regulations. And Christy had a Excel document that shows some of the comparisons between the BACB professional ethics, I believe it was guidelines, and comparing some of those to the unprofessional conduct regulations. And then there was some individuals within the committee who had put forward some recommendations on which ones might be helpful to be modeled or brought over. So there's some information to look at in terms of that document or that Excel file as well. So we'll send you some homework items prior to the next meeting. Go ahead and review those. And then if you can be ready for the December meeting to discuss those items, that would be helpful for us.
And here's one of the other things that I learned at this meeting that we went to is that there's things that are aspirational versus things that are actionable, right? And so, I think we need to decide what's what for us. Okay, so come to the next meeting with loose sleeves so you're ready to roll your sleeves up and get down to work, because next meeting is going to be a working meeting and we're going to get some of this stuff knocked out. How's that sound? Thank you, guys. Are you all excited to be on the committee now? Yes.
Very excited.
All right. Well, thank you very much. What the official thing that I'm supposed to do now is take a motion to adjourn. All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in
Christy.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anybody want to hang out for a little bit longer? No? All right. Motion carries. Thank you, guys.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you, everyone.
See you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.